I'm joined by Father Dave Afaro, who is a priest in the Diocese of Springfield, Massachusetts. We met at the Eucharistic Congress there. He was the spiritual director. He's going to share his path to the priesthood, which is very exciting, and more from the Congress. So, Father, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Well, the journey you had to the priesthood was unlike any that I'd ever heard before. So could you share that?
Sure. I feel like you probably say that a lot, but you know what? I'll share it. I didn't always think about being a priest. When I was 10 years old, my dad had a ruptured brain aneurysm that forced my family to live with my grandmother. And then when I was 14 years old and my grandmother, she died, and we were giving a year by our uncle to vacate the premises. Otherwise, we were going to be evicted. And so a year went by. My mom, God bless her, she didn't really have a plan. And so we stayed home from school that day, and we were evicted out of my house. Time was kind of going on, and it was getting dark out, and I was getting kind of hungry, and the reality of being homeless actually kind of set in. And so what ended up happening was one of the neighbors from the neighborhood named Miss Cherry, she took us in for a couple of weeks, and we stayed with her for a couple of weeks. And after about a couple of weeks, there wasn't necessarily a plan. So I stayed with another friend of mine for a couple of days, and during that couple of days, I was asked, do I want DSS to get involved, foster care? And not that we wanted them to get involved, but we had no other choice. And so while this was all going on, there was some stories percolating around the neighborhood amongst our friends, and they told our neighborhood priest, Father Michael Garino, a little bit about what was going on. And so some folks invited me to go talk to Father Mike. Father Mike Lorino. He was a guy in the neighborhood. He had like a jet ski. He drove around. He was pretty popular with the people and that kind of thing. At the time, I didn't want to go talk to him because I don't want to tell him about my problems. I don't want to bother him. And I wasn't really going to church all that often at that point. I only went to church when I was serving mass, or on the holy days of obligations like Easter, Christmas, those kinds of feasts. So there was another day off from school. I went to go talk to Father Mike. I went from my house all the way down to Father Mike's place. And, and I walked by the house at first. I went over to a grocery store and got like a Coke or something like that, and chips, just to forgo meeting with him. And then I went back and we chatted. We talked about for an hour. And after an hour, I kind of shared my story, shared what was going on, shared some of the things I told you, laughed, cried, that whole thing, and laid it all on the table. And then after that whole thing, after about an hour, he looked at me and asked me if I've ever thought about becoming a priest. And I was a little floored by that. I was flattered by the question, actually, because I never knew where priests came from. I didn't know if priests kind of like fell out of the sky and just started celebrating mass. And if you told me that, I would have said, "Oh, okay, that's what it is," But
That's
but in that time period, it just goes to show that it comes from asking a young man, from a priest inviting someone to do that. And that's like the majority of people who become priests. They are invited by a priest. So I had that interaction, had that exchange. And after that, that hour long time period that we had, I went back, and I went back over there. We had lunch together like once a week. We talked about some of the different things that were kind of going on. And I got more involved in the mass. I started lecturing. I developed a really love for it, and just wanted to do everything I can. Then I got invited to some more things, and got introduced to another priest named Father Paul Soper, who's out in the Archdiocese of Boston. And, we got to know each other. He took me to his youth group. As I mentioned, I was in DSS.
How long were you in foster care for?
I think, from the age of just about, when I said 15, about six, right when I was turning 16. So from there until the end of college, so about 6 years.
What was the foster system like?
I don't really necessarily know how it was for me. I was very lucky because I had a very good social worker. And so the social worker worked long hours for us. He advocated for us. He got us what we needed. He introduced us to the right people, and got us different foster homes. And sometimes a foster home works out, and sometimes it just doesn't. And so he picked up on that, and then he was able to just kind of put me in a good situation where it was kind of mutually beneficial for everybody involved. And we had regular meetings, you know, probably like once a month, you know, just to check in, see how things were going. And then my social worker followed me into college, checked in with me once a month, drove out to UMass Amherst from Boston. That's about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, and checked in. And God bless him, he was a major support. So that was, you know, something that was good for me. And I didn't spend a lot of time in DSS. It wasn't like a thing that really formed me. What really, in my opinion, what really formed me was the Catholic faith, were the priests, was the youth group. And even though my family had we had a tough background, the faith was definitely there. So those are the things that really kind of, you know, kind of formed me. So although like I never felt like I was a product of the system, I never felt like the system defined me in any way. I felt like I was a child of God, and I always kind of lived in that sort of that identity, that realization. And I suppose that's a grace as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I know so many people have such wounds from their family, right? It must have been pretty hard to have your uncle evict you.
Yeah.
What was that like at that age, and how have you grown in forgiveness in that?
Yeah, at that age, it's like a major, as you're saying, it's a totally major wound. It's something that you had to work through. You know, you just absolutely had to work through, and the whole process of forgiving when you're young at that age, you're not thinking at that point, I need to go out and forgive my uncle. You know what I mean? Or I need to go out and forgive these people. I'm thinking I'm angry, and that's it. You know, and that kind of thing. And the world owes you something. But then eventually, you know, as I came to my faith in college, as I was more involved in the Newman Catholic Center and developed more of that Christ-centered relationship in Christ, that's where it kind of really helped foster it. And really, I would say, you know, it- I would say throughout most of my time in college, I stayed a distance because, you know, God bless you, you can't have a relationship with people who unfortunately don't want to have a relationship with you, and hopefully that's not your own family or anything. But you just can't, you know. And you know, during my second year of seminary, I would say, I went to a Steubenville conference for pre-seminarians and deacons, and that's where, you know, sort of like the grace of the Holy Spirit really came in and really helped me in my process, sort of forgiveness, of actually letting it go. And it was interesting because like while I was in prayer, like you had that realization there, and while you're having it, you want to hold on to it, because that's not only is that like you're angry and stuff, that's like it's almost part of your identity. I've held on to this for so long. If you take it away, like who am I going to be? Even though it's better for you in the long run, obviously. But that was like sort of that moment. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute, this is from the Lord. So it's like, okay, take it if you're going to take it. You know, I forgive if you need me to forgive. And it kind of goes in into that process. It's like um a voluntary act of the will to forgive somebody. You know, it's not necessarily about good feelings, that kind of thing. You have to make a conscious effort as you know this, to forgive, and you know that as you kind of go on. And although it's like you can be angry and feel resentful in the moment, it's like, well, wait a minute, the Lord wants me to forgive people. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to do what the gospel says, and in that, it's very freeing and healing in the process. So it's important.
Was your uncle a practicing Catholic?
You know, honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I think my uncle, when we're talking about my uncle, this is my mother's side of the family. And so was he a practicing Catholic? I would say definitely went to you know, the major feasts. And I'll just back this up a little bit and say that there was a family feud. I'm not here today to like, obviously we're not here today to like blame anybody or that kind of a thing. But there was a family feud, and we were just kind of in the middle of it, unfortunately, the kids. And not to downplay it, but was he? I don't believe so, because I really don't have a really solid enough relationship with him to really make that judgment. Um, but if I were going to lead some way, I'd say no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
so the reason I bring this up, not to like go into the details of that
sure.
at
Yeah,
all, I've seen there's so many people that are Catholic and Christian, right? And then so many people are scandalized by things that happen, and this and this and this. And you can go to this person and they justify it, and this person and say it's sinful and all these things. And it's like really when it comes down to is like, you know, the what would Jesus do? You know, it's so cliche, but it's so true, right? And I think like if we're really if we really want to be Catholics, if we really want to be Christians, the goal is sainthood, you know.
Mm.
And so there's obviously so many factors involved with it, but it's really the best phrase I know is, how would this look in the light of eternity, right? So all these things, how would that look in the light of eternity? You know, is this that big of a deal to cause this much, you know, trauma within the family or whatever, in any situation, totally unrelated to that. And I think that's a good frame to look things through. And I try to do that a lot, especially like raising kids, you know, like little things. Am I going to blow this up with my wife? Is this little thing that big of a deal? All these things that really put it into the proper perspective, because money and power and influence and all these things and pride are very alluring in the moment. But at your deathbed, what will you be happy that you did? So thanks for sharing all that, Father. I wanted to bring you on because I'd never met a priest that said, yeah, I was evicted when I was a teenager and was in the foster care system. That's amazing. So I'm so glad God gave you the grace to persevere through that, to not harden your heart and to become bitter, but that you are so blessed to have people in the church that reached out and really took you in to show the love of Christ in that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate that. And I love that perspective that you just shared out and laid out for us and for the viewers. It's like, one thing I would just add, I feel like no excuse, sanctity, like that's the goal, obviously, right? There's so many programs, so many things people can do for you. And then it also comes down to, I also like to point out personal responsibility as well, and how you fit into that. Ultimately, it comes down like between you and God. You got to take that step. Mary's fiat, right?
Yeah, because you could have totally been like, I'm going to hold on to this, you know, and like, you know, even today, like I'm sure there's millions of Catholics throughout the world that are like going to mass. Some of them maybe going to daily mass, but they're holding on to things, you know, and they're like, if they could let go of that, it would totally change their perspective and relationships with others. So thank you for doing that. Because at the end of the day, in football, our coaches would always say, all that matters is how you react, you know, and I think that's really like such a motto for Christianity. It's how we react. Injustice will happen, but our reaction makes all the difference. So especially in these days where there's a lot of scandal within the church, you know, we look at things going on, but it's, what do we do? Do we allow that to get us down and, you know, to lead us farther from Jesus, or like to really hunker down and raise saints within our own areas?
So I went to UMass Amherst. I was kind of resisting the whole notion of priesthood, not because I wasn't attracted to it. I was very attracted to it. I went to a come and see retreat when I was in high school. Decided not to go to the college seminary because I felt I don't want to run away and join the circus. I knew that there's some things that kind of went down, and I really wanted to test the call. So I figured if I went to UMass Amherst and studied, got a degree, those kinds of things, and then at the end of my time in college, then I would really have to figure this out and go for it. And that question, have you ever thought about becoming a priest, never really left my mind. It was like in the back of my mind throughout my whole entire time in college. And at the end of it, my last year, I started getting involved at the Newman Catholic Center. I started doing, more things like with the Vocations Club. And I was in spiritual direction. And probably the last semester during my winter break, I was basically lying down in my bed. There were a few different options that I had: grad school, going to join a job, even dating somebody. And I thought about, what about the seminary? Where does that stand? And then as I was thinking that, when the seminary came on my mind, like a tremendous peace came over me. And I said, you know what, that's it. That's where it's at, because I was praying the whole time during my winter break to think about, like what the next step was. And so I go back to college, involved in the Newman Catholic Center at this point at University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And there were a group of focus missionaries there, Fellowship of Catholic University students. They were asking me like what my plans were after college. We had a whole group of people. We were having lunch after mass. I asked what my plans were after college. I said, and I was trying to keep it on the down low at this point. I was like, I'm going to go and get a job. And they were like trying to pressure me, and not like a good positive pressure, positive peer pressure to go and join Focus Missionaries. And I was like, well, oh no, I want to get a job. I want to make money. And I was keeping seminary on the down low. And then at one point, one of the Focus Missionaries said, when are you ever going to have a time to serve God in your life? And I said, at that point, I said, when I joined the seminary. And then the whole entire table just kind of laughed and stuff. And then And I said, by the way, guys, I didn't want it to be like this, but I am actually thinking about the seminary and I want to apply at some point. So I did. I went to another come and see retreat in college. And after that come and see retreat, I really want to join the next year. And so I did. And as I was finishing up college, I applied for my civil engineering job. I got it. And on the first day of my job, I got accepted to the seminary. And I told them my third day, they let me go after 2 weeks. And then I entered the seminary in the fall, and it's been a kind of a gradual position ever since. Within the first month of me being in seminary, it was clear to me that I was on the right path and that I was in the right place, and things were going well. And my various summer assignments and pastoral assignments, I was very blessed by having really good, wonderful pastoral assignments and getting a lot out of it.